China's plans to invade the relatively small yet globally significant island of Taiwan may be hitting a major roadblock. The Philippines, backed by the U.S.
Diplomatic trouble may be brewing again between China and the United States.
But what is it about the Philippines that makes them play such a pivotal role in this scenario? In the year 2023, Taiwan may be the most strategically important piece of real estate on Earth. This de facto independent island nation 110 miles off the coast of the Chinese mainland sits at the center of the world's economic and geopolitical fault lines. Since it came to power in 1949, the Chinese Communist Party has regarded Taiwan as a renegade province, a relic left over from its long civil war and the century of humiliation it climaxed. This was the period between 1839 and 1949 where China repeatedly found itself invaded, defeated, occupied, and partitioned by foreign powers. Taiwan's self-governing status is a reminder to the Chinese leadership of those times, and reunifying it with the mainland is one of the most important objectives for China's authoritarian leader, Xi Jinping, who hopes that the process will be completed by 2049, the centennial of the Chinese Communist Party's ascendancy to power. There are many obstacles to this plan, but one of them is not so often cited: the Philippines. Let's take a look at the Philippines, its tense relationship with China, and how this nation threatens Beijing's grandest foreign policy ambition. Taiwan is important to the Chinese leadership not just for historical reasons, but because of its economic and geostrategic position. Economically, Taiwan hosts the world's most advanced semiconductor industry through the dominance of one company, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC. In 2021, Taiwan had 63% of the world's semiconductor market share, with 54% of the world total being through TSMC alone. These chips are at the heart of the world's digital economy and power everything from computers to the brake sensors in cars. For China, gaining control of this industry would be very desirable, as placing itself at the heart of the globe's high-technology supply chain has been a major priority for its geopolitical strategy, as seen in its Made in China 2025 plan. If the semiconductor shortage of the past few years made things more expensive, Beijing getting to dictate the supply chain of these vital components would increase the price tag of almost everything much further. Geopolitically, Taiwan also sits at the center of the first island chain, the series of islands that span from Japan to Indonesia. These islands act as a natural obstacle to China's expansion into the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Restoring Taiwan to Beijing's rule would break this chain and allow China to freely access the world's oceans without having to go through the choke points that the first island chain presents, such as the Strait of Malacca or the Miyako Strait. Controlling these choke points is one of the United States Navy's principal strategies for containing Chinese military expansion. If China were to take Taiwan, however, it would have the land and ports it needs to bypass the choke points, making containment much more difficult, if not impossible. The United States is Taiwan's most important potential ally. Officially, America treats Taiwan with a doctrine of strategic ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying that it would come to the island's defense if it were to be invaded. But under the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, it has long sold sophisticated weapons to the island nation to deter such an invasion from happening. With this equipment, Taiwan has pursued what it calls a porcupine strategy, fortifying itself as heavily as possible and building offensive assets to deal damage to the Chinese mainland, all to increase the costs China would incur for an invasion and hold out as long as it can while it awaits the aid of its allies. Japan would also play an important role in the defense of Taiwan. In December 2021, the late former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said that the United States and Japan would not be able to stand idly by if Taiwan were attacked. In March 2022, only a few months before his shocking assassination, he urged the United States to drop strategic ambiguity and affirmatively say it would defend Taiwan. A Taiwan contingency is a Japan contingency, he said, because China establishing air superiority around Taiwan would cover Japanese airspace. A takeover of Taiwan would also allow China to threaten Japanese shipping even more than it does today, with its militarization of the South China Sea. Japan is a resource-poor nation and must import raw materials and commodities to survive. It cannot allow China to dictate what goes on in the region's shipping lanes. However, for all the talk about Japan and its role in a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan, far fewer people talk about the role the Philippines would play in such a scenario. Thanks to a renewed agreement with the United States, this is starting to change, and Taiwan may soon be able to count on the aid of the Philippines as it stares down the colossus across the strait. The Philippines, though much smaller than the United States and Japan, also has a keen interest in seeing that Taiwan does not become subject to the Chinese Communist Party. and the Philippines has now become a major player in the dispute over Taiwan. The entrance of the Philippines into the Taiwan question is a natural consequence of the diplomatic and military rivalry between it and China, which has occurred in the last decade. The Philippines and China have had a long and bitter dispute over the waters of the South China Sea. In 2012, China seized control of the Scarborough Shoal, a rock with valuable fishing sites and hydrocarbon reserves that rested within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. It was the start of a conflict between China and the Philippines over several rocks and islands in the South China Sea. Other points of contention between the two nations include Mischief Reef and the Spratly Islands, all of which China went on to occupy and fortify. The Philippines brought a suit in international court, and in 2016, a tribunal in The Hague ruled that all of China's territorial claims in the South China Sea, based on a 9-line map drawn in the late 1940s, had no legal basis. Still, China ignored the ruling and occupies these rocks and islands to this day. China's aggressive policy in the area has naturally alienated the Philippines, which is a longtime ally of the United States. The United States has had bases throughout the Philippines since the Spanish-American War of 1898, but its presence is now starting to expand much more. The Filipino military is not a formidable fighting force, meaning that China has mostly been able to get its way in its disputes with the Philippines, despite the international tribunal's ruling against it. The Philippines has about 100,000 active duty personnel, a navy with only a few vessels more fit for fighting than patrol boats, and about 25 combat aircraft. This means that militarily, the Philippines would contribute little to the defense of Taiwan, at least for now. However, the Philippines does have two advantages: its geographical position and its alliance with the United States, which it has now begun ramping up again after a period of frostier relations. In 2014, as the South China Sea dispute began to ramp up, the United States and the Philippines signed the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA. Under the terms of the EDCA, the United States would be able to expand its military presence in the Philippines, although the 2014 document did not specifically state where. In 2016, 5 such locations were announced: Fort Magsaysay, Nueva Ecija, Basa Airbase Pampanga, Mactan Benito Ebuan Airbase, Cebu, Antonio Bautista Airbase, Lumbia Airbase, Cagayan de Oro. Of these, Antonio Bautista was the most important due to its proximity to the disputed Spratly Islands. As China's military buildup grew, the U.S. and Philippines announced 4 new EDCA bases in 2023, Naval Base Camilo Osayas, Santa Ana, Cagayan, Camp Melchor de la Cruz, Gamu Isabela, Balabac Island, Palawan, Laulo Airport, Cagayan. 3 of these are in northern Philippines, close to Taiwan, a clear signal of intent. These new bases help deter a Taiwan invasion via the Luzon Strait, a 160-mile water gap between Taiwan and the Philippines, provide pincer movement potential with Japan from the north and U.S. forces from the south, enable logistics and exercises preparing for a Taiwan defense, allow U.S. forces to pre-position assets closer to Taiwan, countering the tyranny of distance. China's anti-access/area denial strategy is weakened because more U.S. bases mean more targets for Chinese missiles, better distribution of air defenses, higher costs and uncertainty for China in a prolonged war. While nuclear weapons are prohibited on EDCA bases, conventional deterrence is growing fast. President Duterte attempted to cozy up to China, but President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. reversed course and restored strong ties with the U.S. The U.S. is investing $82 million into the EDCA bases, building infrastructure, creating jobs and asserting influence. Unlike many nations involved in China's Belt and Road Initiative, the Philippines has minimal Chinese-funded infrastructure, major skepticism from the public, much more American investment. China's economic coercion, a key foreign policy tool, is much less effective here. Demographics and long-term outlook. The Philippines' population is growing, expected to reach 180 million by 2100. China's population is shrinking, expected to fall to 776 million by 2100. The Philippines' GDP is growing till 6.4% annually since 1990. As the Philippines becomes wealthier and more populous, it may invest more in its military, making it an even greater asset to U.S. regional strategy. China hoped to neutralize the Philippines, maybe even win it over during Duterte's presidency. That strategy failed. With geography, U.S. military backing and rising economic power, the Philippines now stands in the way of China's Taiwan plans. China may have thought that time was on its side, but the renewal of the EDCA might just mean that by 2049, China will be unable to attempt an invasion of Taiwan, let alone succeed.